So when we look at IBD, we can no longer think about the patient with IBD at that point in time. IBD starts early in life, perhaps in utero, and the series of events lead to the diagnosis, in which time we make a therapeutic decision. But at that time, if the patient is in front of us in the office, we don't know what's going to happen to the patient. So we have life before inflammatory bowel disease, and then we have life after IBD diagnosis. And this life can be a good one or a bad one. The patient may or may not respond to therapy, may need a lot of hospitalization or may not, may need surgery or not, may develop cancer or not. So we have to think about IBD as a continuum that goes from early disease into late disease. And this concept is also trickling down at the practical level, at the conscious level of the IBD community, and we start to do the top-down or bottom-up therapies. And with this, the concept that perhaps if we intervene early in the disease is better. In fact, if the triggering factors are really early in the disease, why wait until you have full-blown severe manifestation to intervene more dramatically and perhaps, hopefully, more effectively? So we have a lot of factors in IBD. Probably we still believe that the environment, the genes, the gut, microflora, immune response are the primary factors, but these are modulated by a variety of secondary factors, the neuroendocrine systems, the dumps, the process of angiogenesis, the process of scarring, adipose tissue, and so on. So the picture is very complex, and there's all these interactions between all these factors that make our life very complicated. And now I came up with my own OM. How about thinking about the convergome? The converging of factors that lead to IBD. This is an editorial by Arthur Kaiser in Gut, where he talks about the convergence of the NOD pathway with the autophagy pathway and the ER stress. And in fact, all these events are actually happening at the same time. We don't quite understand if there's a sequence yet of events, but clearly we can demonstrate that all these pathways are activated. So that it seems that we need a lot of events to actually cause the disease, or a lot of events to maintain the disease. So of all the factors, there is this complex interacting network that lead to IBD pathogenesis. And we have to ask ourselves, how do we handle this? If we keep studying individual components in individual models, in individual lab, it's hard to conceive that we're going to see the pictures, all together. And we have to think about this. This is something I really like to show. This is an editorial in Nature Immunology with a paper by Ron Germain saying you have to embrace complexity. You have to accept the fact that diseases are complex and develop methodologies that are looking at the disease in a global fashion. The canonical pathways are good to get funded and are good to publish paper, but they're not good to understand the disease. So we have all these omes now, the transcriptome, the inflammasome, the resolvome, the exposome. So how do we handle that? Actually, it's very simple. All you have to do is change an E to an X, and you do transcriptomics, inflammasomics, exposomics, apoptosomics. The problem is that each one of them is extremely complex. And what we need is collection of huge amount of data and analyzing by system biology, where we analyze in an artificial, in silico fashion, all the complexity of the data based on hopefully correct assumptions, and we generate information that give us a global picture of diseases. So we get biopsies, we get blood, and so on. We get a large bolus of molecular data. We analyze construction of models, and then we start to define outcomes signature. If the patient had a mother who was obese and they took antibiotic early in life and then was exposed to a clean environment and was in a hospital many times, perhaps you will have a bad signature of a bad disease. But you can diagnose this not after the facts, but early in life, and vice versa for a good outcome. And obviously it will be tremendously important in predicting if this is a patient that will need early intervention or more aggressive therapy or not. I don't think we're ever going to be able to change the natural history of disease, but we can modulate it for the better once we are diagnosed with the disease. So, going back to the forest, this is actually a picture from the Amazon forest where I go fishing. I didn't show the picture of fishing this time, but maybe next time. And this is a nice river. This is a beautiful forest, virgin forest, and this is like IBD. So what do we do? So we need to create genetic, environmental, microbial, and immune signatures. And we're not quite ready yet, but at least we are aware of that. So the omes that I mentioned, they're here to stay. And probably understanding the omes holds the key to inflammatory bowel disease. And the omics are the techniques that we need to apply to understand the omes. Perhaps with this approach, combining the omes with the omics, we can understand both the complexity of the disease and the individuality of the patient response. Thank you. Any questions? I'll be glad to answer.
Claudio, that was wonderful, as usual. Did I hear you correctly, though, that you don't think that we're going to be able to alter the natural history of the disease?
Nah.
You don't think anti-TNFs and infliximab antibodies alter the natural history of the disease?
Once you have the disease diagnosed, it's too late. You make the patient better, but the disease will never go away. To me, changing natural history means not making the patient better. We've been doing that for years, is to make the disease go away.
Okay. So cure it, essentially.
Yeah. That's really a change.
Because we've surprisingly been able to reset people, not always on purpose, by doing bone marrow transplant.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting that eventually it comes back. They need another initiating
Yeah,
event.
the question is, are the same environmental triggering factors changed? Because if you have, let's suppose that your triggering factor is something which is postnatal, and you live in the same environment where it's still there. Maybe that's enough to maybe different form of disease, but give you the disease because there are multiple genes. So it is possible, but then you really basically change the whole composition of the individual that way. And that's possible, I think, is believed to change the natural history and eliminate the disease that way. I think it's possible. But then you're no longer yourself, you're a chimera.
Well, at Cleveland, I suppose the surgeons say that they're resetting.
Yeah, people love the word resetting. You know, Steph Targan used that 20 years ago. Still, we haven't reset it.
So the IL-1 alpha data is very interesting. Have you tried to pinpoint what are the target cells of the IL-1 beta? I mean, IL-1 alpha?
All the cells are, because all the cells have IL-1 receptor.
But that was in the cell amount. Did you try to do it in patient tissue to see if there's an increase in IL-1 alpha receptors, or to specifically in IL-1?
Yeah, those studies have been done about 10, 15 years ago. Yeah, there is an increase of IL-1 receptor also. You know, there was a time when IL-1 was defined as a strong biological factors, and so IL-1, there's a balance between all these family members have anti-inflammatory activity, pro-inflammatory activity. And there are two types of receptor. There are IL-1 receptor 1, which is an agonist, and the IL-1 receptor 2, or IL-1 receptor antagonist, that blocks the response. So the balance between the type 1 and type 2 determines how much you see as far as inflammatory signals. But now, for instance, Dinarello just reported IL-37, which is interleukin-1, which is a strong inhibitor of innate immune responses. So the IL-1 family is really very fundamental to innate immune responses, the acute responses. And IL-1 alpha is one of the components. But IL-1 alpha usually not seen in healthy conditions because it's not secreted. And all the job is done by interleukin-1 beta. But once the cells die, obviously you add to this pro-inflammatory insult.
I think the dermatologists are really interested in that IL-1 family because it's important in proliferation of the epithelial cells.
Oh, yeah. And actually, keratinocytes were the first cells to be described to produce huge amount of interleukin-1 alpha.
Right.
Yeah, there was a paper in JX Med 25 years ago on that.
I was wondering if, you need probably the epithelial. I noticed that all the action associated with IL-1 alpha is epithelial that you show.
That's a system we use because the epithelial cells are the easiest to damage.
Right. I wonder, the epithelial phenomena that's probably the most unique to IBD is the crypt abscess.
Mm-hmm.
And that would seem to be a perfect setup for like a little pocket of huge amounts of IL-1 alpha. Have you had a chance to look at human tissue or models where you get a lot of crypt abscesses?
Not particularly, no. But I don't think you have to have the crypt abscess to have tons of IL-1 alpha. You have it anyway. What is interesting, however, when you look at this, most or the histologic pictures, you don't, the crypt cells are intact, right? You don't see ulcers in the, usually the classical picture of cryptat is you see the neutrophils in the crypt, but the epithelial cells is intact. So that's probably just the migration, but somewhere else in the vicinity there is tissue destruction, undoubtedly. And obviously they're not just one alpha, they cause inflammatory infiltrates and neutrophils infiltrate. You know, we tend to expect in vivo the models that we use, which are very restricted and convenient.